Hello again everyone and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John and as always thank you so much for being here. Serious topic? Let's do it. What is the most disturbing thing that's ever happened to you? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Went for drinks after work with my girlfriend at the time. After 2 drinks I decided to switch to soft drinks. We went to an Indian restaurant and ordered our usual. Halfway through, I blacked out and hit my head on a chair on the way down. My next memory is being on the floor away from my table, my girlfriend being comforted by other people who were in the restaurant, and is in a flood of tears. The thing is, I vividly remember whilst I was out, a feeling of playing football, which was one of my favorite things to do when I was younger, and it ending with what can only be described as a flash of light and instantly regaining consciousness. It wasn't until the next day that my girlfriend told me that the reason she was so panicked by what had happened was that I'd stopped breathing almost immediately after collapsing, and it had felt like a couple of minutes before the guys looking after me got me breathing again. My best friend was murdered 10 feet from me. Luckily I didn't see it happen. As we were running from gunfire at the time, I actually laughed as he fell because I, as it turns out, had just jumped over some brush, and I thought at the time he tripped over it. I didn't find out for another hour that he was hit by a stray bullet. To this day, I don't know if it was just dumb or my brain decided, nope, didn't happen, he just tripped, and that is what we're going with. I volunteered with an R-Crisis hotline for a year. I got a call from a woman who was sharing how their ex-boyfriend was sharing videos of him R-ing her 12-year-old daughter as revenge for dumping him. Having to listen to her talk about the photos and videos and talk her through what had to do was heartbreaking. Several decades ago, my roommate brought home an unconsciously drunk girl from a club and attempted to R her. I and a friend intervened and brought her back to the club before he could. Still scarred from that night, and me and roommate just about never spoke again. While working at a pizzeria, we got a call on our private line. It's not a supplier, it's a wrong number. That night, it was the wrongest number. I picked up the receiver, and this young-sounding kid was screaming into the phone, thinking I was their mom. They had gotten into a car accident and were clearly traumatized. Initially, I tried to gently inform them that they had the wrong number, but they only cried for their mom even more. "Mom, it's me," over and over again, sobbing. I tried to get their location or any info I could to try and get emergency services dispatched from our other line, but they were hysterical and couldn't answer. After a few minutes of me trying to calm them and get them help, the call disconnected. I've had a good deal of traumatic shit happen, but that voice has never left the back of my head. I hope they got help. I hope they're okay. Yeah, that's terrible. Not knowing the outcome or anything else. I hope they were okay. My best friend, 13, died while saving kids from drowning. I found out a week later, days before cell phones. During school Christmas holidays, first person I knew who died, and nothing prepares you for the coldness of the body when you go to say goodbye. My mom tried to kill me on multiple occasions, but the worst was when I finally told someone she was abusing me. She stabbed me and beat me within an inch of my life. I couldn't return to school for a few weeks. But the most disturbing part? I was never removed from her care. My husband of 40 years molested a 12-year-old autistic girl and adopted grandchild in our home, in our living room, when my daughter and all of the grandkids were there. My 2 oldest granddaughters witnessed it. It traumatized my whole family. He was eventually arrested and is now in jail. I divorced him as soon as they found him and put him in jail. I was in shock for months. I'll never understand why he did it. It is so disgusting, and everyone involved had to seek counseling. How does someone do this to his whole family? Now 2 years later, I've taken my home and property and made it mine. With the help of an old family friend, we've worked on this place for a year and a half and erased him from it. The best day was when my kids and grandkids came over and helped me burn all of his stuff and our bed and a lot of other miscellaneous things. Then I could go forward and cleanse him from my life. I worked at a public library. The library had many homeless that hung around all during the open hours. There was one I started noticing. He would follow me around the book stacks. I'm male also. This homeless guy would seem to always be at the opposite end of a row of bookshelves from me. On my late night, I worked till closing. In the very back rows of the building, it was deserted. I was looking for a book. I was bent over looking at the bottom shelf. I could see out of the corner of my eye. He rushed to the aisle I was in, then just started looking around at the far end. I could see he was looking at me out of the corner of his eyes. I just continued doing what I was doing. I then could see him start running towards me with his arms raised up. I stood and looked at him. I could, in his raised hands, he was holding a box cutter. I held some books in front of me and yelled at him, "What are you doing?" He lowered his arm, stopped running, and just walked past me. I followed him, yelling at him. He just walked out into the dark night. I was held hostage in an apartment for 24 hours and arred repeatedly by a man and his girlfriend. Once they fell asleep from drug-fueled exhaustion, I managed to creep out onto a ledge that was 12 stories high, move across to the living room balcony, and exit through the front door. Some old bastard fired a warning shot through some trees, whizzed right by my ears. Everything would have just went out like a light switch. I think about that quite a bit. I was young and drinking when I shouldn't have, so I never told the cops or my family about it. I think about it from time to time. I have a very spotty childhood. I can only remember a handful of moments, and unfortunately some of those moments are of me being SA'd by my biological father. My earliest memory. I was referring to him as a boyfriend jokingly, but almost seriously. I was probably 3 or 4. I can vividly remember some instances of the disgusting things he made me do for his pleasing, but I can't even remember how old exactly I was. I just know it happened so many times. Fast forward to when I was 16, a friend of mine also threatened to tell a teacher if I didn't speak up. He was still living with me, and at this point I had already confessed to my bio mom, which, adding to it, she didn't care enough to call the police, but to just have a few chats with him whenever he was either caught in the act or had the courage to speak up on those times it would happen. He fled to a city 2 hours away from where I was staying at, and at this point my 2 other siblings found out just what had been occurring in the dark. My dad would come to visit later on, as my mother and siblings still viewed him as a husband and father and treated me like I was the problem. At one point I was told to stay inside because I had filed a restraining order while he and them were all outside mingling and laughing. The police finally caught up to him, and he served 5 years. While he did, my family continued to keep in contact with him via letters, phone calls, and even in-person visits, while I was left to deal with my trauma alone. Fast forward to today. He's out and was deported, and my mother and siblings still in fact keep in contact with him. One of my siblings actually lives with him, and I assume my mom and other siblings visit or stay the night from time to time, so I hear but don't doubt. Sometimes it sucks knowing they're probably living life like it never happened, as shitty as they are being a family, while I deal with CPTSD, social anxiety, depression, numbness due to overwhelming all-around emotions, anger, stomach aches from really bad anxiety, frowning a big loving families, and all those things, Had a friend in high school that had a neglectful dad and no mom. She lived with me for about 3 months until my mother said our extended sleepover had to end. During that time she spent with me, she would cut or burn herself. I was her overnight medic. I'd crazy glue the deep ones closed, and after she fell asleep, I would put new skin liquid bandage on the rest so that she didn't leave blood on the sheets. I didn't dare tell my mom, since having me as a medic was much better than her being at her house and bleeding. When my mother said she had to leave, I secretly told the school counselor, who finally told her dad what was happening. We haven't been friends in a long time, but she's still alive to this day. I hope I made a difference, even if it felt like a betrayal of our friendship at the time. I knew it was the right thing to do, but as a teen, it just felt bad to tattle on my friend. I know that we don't like to tattle and snitches get stitches and all that stuff, but, in that situation, I think, you could make that assessment, and I think you ultimately did the right thing for your friend. I was at a pedo once. We were both teachers in a foreign country. Took a year of questions, and even then I wasn't sure, but when I saw him convincing a woman to let him teach her young daughter, I called him out, and in his explosive outburst to me, he admitted it. The disturbing thing was, I met with a group of expats later that day, and one very weird guy got too excited about hearing about this pedophile. He kept talking about how they'd go and get him, but there was this perverted excitement on his face that made my skin crawl, and I felt like he wanted to know the other guy to befriend him. Also, I was attacked by a group of guys with machetes in a different country. Hospital visit for a week, but when I reviewed the videos we took of them, I missed that one of them had a pump-action shotgun. At 4 years old, I was essayed by a much older neighborhood bully. I was forced to suck him, have my ass played with, and forced to play with another girl my age. This person had severely beaten in the past, so I feared him greatly. I also didn't understand exactly what was happening. It took a fairly long time to get over. I'm not sure I am. After this, my parents didn't pursue it with the authorities or anything else. They talked to the other kids' parents and tried to ignore. Ooh, 1980s. The perpetrator stopped for a while, but eventually came back. One day he decided to beat me up and I was on a trampoline. I jumped off and landed on all fours, my wrist hitting a split down the middle porcelain bowl. The sharp edge cut my left hand most of the way off and caused me to have emergency surgery and years of recovery due to internal damage. I still have a massive scar on my wrist. I've had other bad things happen, but this was the first and the worst. 13 years ago, an ex-cop from my hometown who was let go from the force due to drug abuse and for being intoxicated on the job beat the shit out of me for thinking I ding-dong ditched him when it was a group of kids unrelated to me that perpetrated it. I was walking home from a friend's house that night in that neighborhood I lived in and grew up in, where all of a sudden this ex-cop found me, thought I was part of the group that rang his doorbell, and next thing I knew, he abducted me and beat the shit out of me on his lawn with a buddy of his who used a wooden bat. Neither of them could be reasoned with, and the lawn was secluded from others. On an overnight ferry, there was one passenger who was clearly off his head on a mixture of drugs and alcohol. He started having a massive fight with his girlfriend and threatening to commit suicide. Myself and another passenger tried to calm him down, but given what he'd consumed, nothing was going to help. The pursuer got involved. When he barricaded himself into a toilet, myself and the other passenger suggested we let him stay there to calm down. The purser said no. They needed to get him out because they didn't want him damaging the sinks and toilets. Then the captain comes down, and he was clearly massively out of his depth in this situation. He looked like a deer staring into headlights when confronted with what was going on. When the guy said he wanted to go out on the deck to have a smoke, the captain said go ahead. A few seconds later, I watched him fly over the side. They had children, and they were sleeping in a cabin. In the morning, when everyone got up for disembarkation, the girlfriend blamed me and the over passenger for what happened. Was at band nationals and staying in a room with a bunch of other women. I was 12, though, as there was a wide range of ages from teens to adults. The girls would always get wild afterwards and bring home men. I was sleeping on the pullout, and one of the men, still drunk, came to the pullout and proceeded to arm me. Being 12, I lay there completely silent. Even now, I don't even know if they knew what he did. That one drunken moment for him dictated my whole life. He probably doesn't even remember. When I had just moved out of state to a new school, I made a friend on the cheer team. She invited me to hang out with her and some friends. The friends ended up being this guy she was seeing and two guy friends. I think they were from Guatemala, and the other one, or the older one, kept staring at me. I was 15 and very much naive. We got into the car to go get snacks, and he sat behind me. It was a two-door Mustang, so it was cramped. When we arrived at the store, I went to get out, and he slipped his arm around my neck and started to squeeze, telling me to stay put. My friend and the other guys left. The one behind me proceeded to choke me while going up my shirt and undoing my pants and sticking his fingers inside me. I had never been touched, and if I struggled, he squeezed tighter. He was kissing my neck and licking my ear. I felt so effing violated. It took forever, or at least felt like forever, for my friend to come back. He told me I liked it, and if I said anything, he'd stab me with a knife in his pocket. I didn't have a car, and my mom wasn't home. It took me years to let a man I was in relationships with to let them touch me. I was so disgusted.